normal we are living right now as designers. We are well equipped to this. So this is important to know. We are luckily a profession, not like the airline profession who is not equipped for it, who is devastated by it. We actually are prepared because we've been working digitally for many years. But it is important to show what the atmosphere is like. When you are in your office, this is me at UBC, when I get very tired, this is what happens after a while. I have to find a way to stand and improvise, and we have to improvise also in this current situation. But one thing which is apparent, and I think this is what I wanted to talk to you about, is with the tablets we have available today, hand drawing, which is one of my favorite things to do, is one of the major and most important tools we should not forget. We should actually be more and more interested in. So my lecture today is called Hand Drawings in Unprecedented Times Under the Condition We Live In. And these are some of the links to my work below, but it's recorded, so you will have that at the end as well. But before I start, I will show you where we are now in the world of Zoom, and we are on Zoom right now, and how I teach currently in my studios and in my class. This is a Seeing Environment lecture screenshot from my lecture. I visualize my lecture, so you can see me there at the top. And I think it's really important because we now have the hand drawing skill and we have the technology, you can actually combine the two. And I think it's important that we do this. But let's start from the beginning. Drawing is one of the oldest ways how man expressed themselves. This is one of my most favorite drawings. It's called The First Kiss. It's 30,000 years before Christ. It's very old. It was found in a cave in Brazil. And it just shows you how important drawing is. This is a recent drawing, about 25 years ago, for a Christmas card I did from my office. Every year I hand drew the Christmas card. And this one actually made it into the Garden Museum in Düsseldorf in Germany, where the director thought that was quite an interesting way of explaining artificial landscapes from nature to artificial landscapes and the evolution process. So drawing is not just a representation tool, it is a thinking tool. So today we're going to talk briefly about drawing and the design history, drawing types and how I teach at UBC, and I've done it abroad, drawing methods in landscape architecture, drawing and design process, memory sketching, and some examples for professionals how to animate drawings, and some examples for the professionals how to generate behavioral change. Drawing and design history. So when they started, nearly 40,000 years ago, people didn't have the equipment. So they stenciled, they used their hand and sprayed ash or dirt around it. And I think this is, again, an amazing inspiration for me when I see these drawings, how people started to express work, or these very sophisticated wild boars. You can see them here on the right corner in a cave in Indonesia. Again, 35,000 years ago. Or the very famous one we all know, a lot of us at least know, in France, where they found these cave paintings. And you can see when you go back to these ones, how much more refined already the faces are and the expressions on the faces and the definition. So like with everything, drawing is a process. But how did it all start? And it took me a long time to find this first architectural drawing. It's on a clay plate in the Palace of Nur Adad in Lhasa. And it's nearly 2,000 years before Christ. And it's one of the first base plans of a building. But there isn't much because paper didn't last. But it is in the period of about 1,000 years after Christ that they started documenting with drawing. And I think it's important to look at this one. This is in St. Gall, which is in Switzerland. It's a monastery, and it's ink on parchment paper. And so that's why it survived so long. So that was one of the biggest problems. The other thing, in the medieval period, most of the drawing was to calculate, for example, refining, so example, structures. So for civil engineering, so if they had to design a vault, these were calculation methods of first ideas how to calculate the vault. So drawing was also used again for communication, how to design for civil engineering purposes, etc. This is a really interesting paper. That's why I cited it here for you to read. But it was really in the Gothic period they started to actually document drawings. And I think it's important to know at that time, most drawings were not done as we see them today in architecture. What happened was that at that time, the craftsman, the master craftsman, architectos, master craftsman, from the Greek archi and tektos, means the master craftsman. He chiseled a column, and his disciple craftsman chiseled the column exactly the same way and made 50 out of them, and that's how they designed their whole buildings. And it was the same way when they did their Gothic cathedrals. The master craftsman made the first, maybe the first mold out of wood, not drawn. He carved it and said to his other colleagues, this is how it's going to be, and built it. And I think it's really important to know this. So in the Gothic period, drawing like we see it today for technical drawing and representational drawings and design drawing didn't exist. However, Brunelleschi then, in the Renaissance period, changed that dramatically by the invention of the 1, 2, and 3-point perspective. And if you look at the Church of Santo Spirito in Florence by Filippo Brunelleschi, you can see how the 1-point perspective had a huge impact on how to design in architecture. It created order, it visualized the spaces. So it was a tool on 2-dimensional paper to represent 3-dimensional space. But it wasn't just the architects who used it, it was the artists. And you can see one of my favorite Renaissance artists is Filippo Lippi, and this is also in Florence. And you can see how it's still a process. The perspectival view is not yet that refined, but it is starting to get refined. And I think it's important to address this, that how important it was to get the perspective. It was, again, a process in doing so. Now, in the Renaissance period, this is the crucial period why drawing got so important. And one of the major masters of this was Andrea Palladio, an Italian, most famous. And I took the students in 2008 to see a lot of his work. And these are some of his drawings, design drawings for a structure, and you can see in plan and elevation. And you can see what I really like is how he uses the drawing as a thinking tool, not as a representational tool in this drawing. In comparison to this one, here it's a representational tool, much more refined. And this is the importance. These kinds of drawings is thinking, and this kind of drawing is for the client. This is what you're going to get. These are the spaces we're going to create. And then this drawing was refined into different kinds of drawings, design drawings and working drawings for the craftsmen and masons to actually chisel those designs into shape. So these are already working drawings. So you can also see the refinement, their measurements on them, scales and detailing. So it helped the craftsmen to come up with ideas. And one other thing which is really important, that was also the time where the architect was separated from the craft. In the Gothic period, the architect would be, the craftsman would be in the side hut with everybody at the church. But then suddenly, Palladio sat in his house and designed, like what we do today, the ideas, and then took the drawings to the site. So there was a disconnect. And this disconnect is happening until today, that we do the drawings like I'm talking to you right now somewhere, and the construction happens somewhere else. So it changed dramatically the way we design. This is Adolf Menzel. I show this because this is from the 19th century, one of our very prolific German painter, but I wanted to show you, even though by that time the perspective was really refined, they all used it constantly when they did their paintings. And I love this one because it's an unfinished painting, and it just shows how they designed their own drawings. Now, drawing types and teaching. So there's two really specific types of drawing for me, and I'll talk about it in my book intensively, but I've made these two quotes for you. Referential drawing, drawn what you see in front of your eyes, and the amount of detail is decided by the drawer. And analytical drawing, analyzing and draw what you cannot see in front of your eyes, like an X-ray view, and use drawing, and this could be orthographic drawing, projection, perspective, to visualize what you see with your X-ray vision. So for example, if you have a facade, you can see, and it has 2 floors, you can see the windows of the 2 floors, but you do not see where the actual ceiling and the roof is. And the X-ray view would then to show a section, imaginative, so that's an analytical decision you as the drawer make by observing the drawing. The elevation, however, would be the referential drawing. So I think that's really important to see the difference. So you have referential and analytical drawing, and both support the seeing and the recording of the environment, not just the design. Landscape architecture starts with site immersion, not when you draw. That's just the final product. And so it's important to understand you have recording of the site, what's there, and then you have your ideation process. And to show this clearly for my book, I developed this diagram, which I'm showing you. This is the complete design process from site immersion to recording what's there. And the recording happens obviously with the 5 senses, not just with sight. That's my argument. And then the analysis, the synthesis, the ideation, and the final design. And as you can see by the way the arrows are positioned, this is a back and forth. This is not a one-way street. So it could be the ideation process and have to go back to analysis, or you have to go back to recording, go back to the site. And it's one of the critiques I have. Students should go back and forth to the site multiple times at the different phases to actually design. So on the trips, this was one of the most influential, or the most influential. I took the students in 2007 to Iran. And this was a student who is now an architect, and actually David is now also in a firm, and in a very prominent firm. And he said that trip changed his life. So it did mine. So drawing can actually change your whole perception of thinking. This is me sitting in Isfahan sketching one of the mosques and understanding scale. And so I think it's important to, when you go into to understand sketching, you need to go on site and you need to actually do the design ideas. And talking about the different kinds, I have some examples here. So this is referential analytical sketching together when they were measuring Caledonia. The map, when they were sailing along the coast, they were mapping it out, and then they drew out of their imagination from the knowledge what they saw, the elevation. So it's a referential and an analytical exercise here combined. While this is a drawing I did on the iPad last year for this lecture, actually, because I've been preparing it for a while. This is a white rose. The way I saw it, it's a referential sketching. Or another referential sketching when I was traveling to the Gulf Islands. How much detail you put in, that's up to you, but that's what I saw in front of my eyes. This again is also in Italy. When I took the students on the abroad course, we were analyzing in Florence structures. And to do that, I taught the students obviously what orthographic projection drawings are. So the projection tool, so an orthographic drawing represents a 3-dimensional object using several 2-dimensional views of the object. And it is also known as an orthographic projection. So for example, you can see an image from the front, an elevation, that would be the referential, and the plan, and the section. And the section would be the analytical, if you don't know, because you have to have that in your head, like with an X-ray, like with an X-ray eye. So these are some more drawings on referential drawings by Palladio, just to show you the different refinements. On the left, you see it in a very sketchy thinking way, and on the right, in a documenting way, actually, I think in that one, he went to visit Agrippa, the bath of Agrippa, to document it, while on the right, it's actually a design drawing, and it's quite refined. So you can see the difference between visual notes on the left and a refined drawing on the right. And then also a even more refined drawing of the first dome by Brunelleschi in Florence to show it maybe to the Pope. And so I think it's really important to see these differences and the different scales, how we use drawing. This is another one where we went to Persepolis in Iran with the students, and one of the students drawing the entrance gates to Persepolis city. And then this is by David, by the way, in Val San Sibio. A year later, I took the students to Italy, and we were looking at the Baroque gardens. And in this garden, I asked the students to document and orientate yourself and visualize the points where, but not with a camera, but use the hand drawing. And they did that. And this for me are referential drawings, obviously. On the other hand, when we took students to Mexico City in 2016 to actually look at water at all the different stages from sewage to rain to stormwater, we also did sketching tours. And this is partially analytical, partially referential, because the student documented the subsidence on the plaza, which we have because of the groundwater receding and the earthquakes they have, and the water they take out, they have so much subsidence that it looks like that. What the student has forgotten, what could have added, was the groundwater table receding to document the analytical part, but we talked about it. And that's also part of the process that the students learn. While this student, when we went to Berlin in 2014 and looked at the Daniel Libeskind Museum, I said, walk through it, and I would like an analytical X-ray drawing. He came up with this drawing out of his head, documenting what he had seen. To do this drawing, you need to understand the site very well and analyze it and really understand it, because this is not a referential drawing. On that note, this is the drawing I actually documented in one of Nadia's books, where it is the same map as I showed before of the Baroque garden in Val San Silvio, the sound pattern. This student analytically listened with the senses to understand the sound, and then you can see some the hedges are a little bit drawn on the right drawing, on the left drawing. On the right drawing is more the forms of the water features, and then the hedges were sort of deflecting the sound, and she was drawing that. And that's absolutely an analytical tool. So analytical drawing. So is this one, where it's looking at using, you have to remember, this is about 2008, long time ago. So Photoshop and using hand together was quite new at the time. And I inspired the students to combine those. There was no Rhino or anything like that. So they did hand drawing to actually show the grading, and then use Photoshop to integrate photos into that. That they learned that photography, which Professor Anna Winston Spurn often says, is a thinking tool, not just a representation tool to observe the site. When you analyze, analytical also means annotation, and this is a really strong piece of work by a student who first wanted to write in text what analysis meant for her, then did diagrams, and after that visualized those with analytical and referential drawings. On the right, the section is obviously an analytical drawing, while the other drawings on the left are more referential drawings. So that the students understand the difference between those things is very important. The same here. This is by a student when we visited the Jewish Memorial at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. There are some referential drawings, which are pretty obvious, the perspectival views and the sections. To come up with these conceptual sections, he had to really understand the site and then draw it in his own opinion, in his own meaning. That would be analytical drawings. This one is from a design studio for stormwater management and LID studio a few years ago, Vertical Studio. The left one is a representation drawing how the stormwater would be running, while the right one is a diagram showing a very sophisticated system of floating wooden logs on water reservoirs with solar cells, which then would stop the evapotranspiration in summer in British Columbia, so that not so much water is lost. And the use of this, after the summer is finished, the logs could be reused for other things. So this whole process explained. So again, an interesting analytical, design analytical drawing. And then some more about LID to represent and visualize the functionality of design drawings of stormwater management. Now, field sketching is also very important, but also multisensorial, and that's what my new book's about. We cannot just use sight, we need to use the skin, touch things, smell things, taste things, to really understand and engage with the landscape. And we do this constantly. So we take the studio outside and critique drawings. This is an environmental design class, the undergrad design course, and I've taught a few years in it and I really enjoy it. And then I also invite very prolific architects in this case to show their own hand drawings and explain them to the students I think that's important. And then the students go out and try their own drawings, and I do a lot of exercises with them so that they constantly practice, because drawing is something you learn by practice. You cannot just learn it by theory. You have to go out and really practice it. And because there's not so much happening in this field anymore, I have decided to make tutorial movies, which you can find on my blog here. And I will show you these, how they work. And you can see they slowly explain to students how to draw, for example, a tree, or how I would draw a tree. And what it does is it helps students, these are done on an iPad tablet. What it helps students is to really spend time on learning how to draw, and see also myself correcting. As you can see, I leave all the corrections. I'm not doing edits because it's a process for me too. Students need to see that professors also struggle and learn. And by everything I do, I learn every time I draw. It's not about perfectionism. It's about learning and endurance and practice. So these little tutorials help the students to really see how a tree, for example, is drawn, and how long it takes, and how many refinements. And then they can, in their own time, spend time looking at this and repeating this to learn. I think that's really important and helps them. The other thing I will talk a bit about it later is obviously my Instagram account. And I've also posted on my Instagram account these animations, and I will show you one which I've created for grading and drainage. I think this one is really important in the sense, I taught grading and drainage for 9 years, and I realized the students often don't get the drawings because it's complicated, but they do get this because it shows you how to grade and protect this platform. And they can also see while I'm drawing, I'm designing. And then they see how the swales around this platform where the building is established and the retaining wall has to be created spatially and visually. And then the good part about it is they also see how the swale adjacent to the road is done and the rain. So they actually see the water flow. And these are hand drawings quickly done. And what they do is they help to visualize very complex processes fast for a client, to convince them, for example, that he needs a retaining wall, or he needs to do this and that to protect his house. So these tools are very useful to communicate those kinds of ideas. And you can add information. You can obviously do them on Rhino, but I have no time for that. It takes too long. So hand-drawn animated tools, animated videos as a tool for communication is much faster. So the last 7 years I spent on perfecting this a bit. And this year, because of when COVID hit, this really helped in my teaching. So these are some examples from my current Seeing Environment class, which is relating to my book, where I teach about seeing the world with the 5 senses, so that the design students don't design multisensorially, not only visually, not only in visual literacy, but also multisensorially. These are some visualizations I do while I teach on the iPad, where I talk about the spatial relationship of a bird flight in space, and I use the rectangular simple box to create space and then put things in it for the students to learn that process. This is one where I look at a plaza at the Beatty Museum and I show desire line, but I actually draw it so that people can see, the students can see what I mean. It's easy with a static drawing, but when you actually draw it while you do, and it's recorded, the students can look at this in their own time again and again until they really get it. And then I ask the students in my classes, I say, I go for a quick espresso. You have half an hour. I would like you to draw me the rainwater pattern from the cloud hitting your roof where you are. Go out of your house until it hits the sewage system in the road. So we did this exercise this fall, and they came up with really beautiful ideas, and really using drawing as a thinking tool, not just a representation tool, and then see all the problems with the pipes, the elevations, and they learn the different kinds of issues of line weight. They learn about how to represent different things in a really fast manner. So it's not about the refinement process, more about the thinking process. This is a student, we were looking at cloud patterns and at the different layers and trying to represent those and the cloud moving while they were watching from their windows while they were with me in the class. So I try to get the students as much off the street as possible in my classes to learn that. So drawing methods in landscape architecture is the next point. And these are drawings when I started using the iPad. So you will see they're very unrefined and how they then change when the iPad Pro came out and when the iPad Procreate app came out, it changes. And you can see this on the way I annotated them. So the way I design is, when I start, it's always with grading. Like Cornelia Hahn-Oberländer says, any design starts, grading goes before planting because it tells you when you grade the land, where's the wettest area, where's the driest. So the grading is the most important. So I use hand drawings to define grading. I use grading then to define planting, or I use understanding foreground, middle ground, background. You can see here with the old stylus that didn't work in 2013 very well with the iPad yet. So I was a bit frustrated at the time, but I think it's important for you all to see how quick, and you will see this in the drawings coming later, that changed. Then landform is important. And these are all drawn by paper 53, which came out in 2013. So, but still, the drawings already explain what's going on. They position the landscape. And I do these drawings to exercise and understand the landscape and the relationship of the planting in relation to the landform. So that is really important. Then I use these drawings often to explain to students about how a constructed perspective is done, even when it's a loose landscape sketch, which I think a landscape architect should be able to do. And then I use different kinds of watercoloring apps, and I explore those too. And I also have an interest to keep it artistic and loose. So a lot of the drawings I explore are quite simplistic and intentionally, because for me it's a tool, and I don't want the students to fall in love with their drawings too much because they end up in a drawer, but what is not ending up is their garden, their plaza they design. That's what people will be using. This is just a means to an end. These are just drawings to help them to come up with visions and ideas. So I do these kinds of little studies to explain what a drama is and what thinking is and so on. And you can see it gets more and more refined over the time, and then Procreate hits. And then you suddenly can start using line weights. You can start using different textures and really refine it. So or you can blur it. So everything is possible now. So now this is up to date. This is last year I drew this on Procreate, and it just shows you the tools are now at a level where you can do exactly the same as you could have done by hand. These are also, again, landforms with Procreate. So I've been really exploring this again as a contrast, going back to the old style, and you can see how it got refined over the time. And then again, for the students, I do explain how on my blog, how I do these landscapes drawings, so that the students understand it's a process, and they see also the difference between foreground, middle ground, background, and that I always start with the grading, and that I always define the site first, that they get a sense for the spatial understanding of the site. And these are just some little drawings for them to see online to inspire them to come up with their own ways of drawing. I just let this run, and you can see with the Procreate now, the sophistication of refinement is pretty strong, and you can do literally anything you want. The drawings are very refined. Same with the old paper 53 people. They weren't very exciting, so I was a little frustrated, but now we are at that level. I drew this last November just for myself to understand and explore. And so the sophistication now is there to do this. So what I'm trying to say is I really encourage the students to learn and have a tablet, because we are now at a level that it is as good as if you draw on paper. Now, I put this in from my own work 20 years ago, to show the students process. So everything I do, even if it's just for the sculpture in a perspectival view, I do lots of drawings. So this is the development of a sculpture for a client, and this is the final perspective. I also designed all the terraces. It's quite a known architect who designed the building in the 50s in Berlin. And this is the different step terrace, and this is the final sculpture in it, my final expression. Because I want the students to see it's a long process, the same with the garden. So these are the different proposals of the garden. And it is so important to see that even for myself or my then staff. I had an office in Shanghai with 40 people, and in Berlin we were 8. So there's a lot of communication, and drawing is a good way to communicate process to everybody and get everybody involved. And then the refinement for myself of this site. This is a project in Babelsberg with a German film like Metropolis was developed, and this is a house very close to that site, and the client asked me to come up with a garden. So these are my first sketches, and you can see out the window views from his bedroom. And but these drawings are not refined intentionally. They're just there to explain for myself what's going on. And these are the design process drawings for myself, and then I draw them sophisticated. These are still in pencil. I was a big fan of Dieter Kienast, who I very much admired in the 90s. So I tried to do a drawing in his style to learn. And that's nothing wrong to copy somebody's style, as long as you don't copy the design. That's totally fine, because this is just a tool to document things. And so I do these drawings also to stay connected to hand drawing. I think that's really important. These are process drawings of the Potsdamer Platz, and again, to show the different iterations. This was done in 1995. I was the landscape architect for that project with Renzo Piano, and it took like 6-7 years to develop, and these were all green roofs, and this is the designing of different green roofs, and then the refinement. Now this is all done by the computer, but at that time there was no computer, so you had to be able to draw, and you can see there's some glue at the top right one. I glued something over. I can't remember what it was, but you actually use what you do now in Photoshop, you physically did on the paper. Or I worked 3 years in Japan, and I couldn't speak Japanese at the beginning, so I used drawing as a language. So these are big projects. This is a big baseball dome I designed with the water feature around it, and it's adjacent to the runway in Hokkaido of a airport. So we were looking at the water walls and how the baseball dome could be designed adjacent to that, and the water wall sucking up the sound from the airport noise. So my job was to communicate and do quick drawings. That's why they are loose. And I encourage my students to do so, because for me, that is important. Drawing, time is money, and you should be spending the money appropriately and use the drawing as a tool like you do Rhino today. These are also drawings from the Potsdamer Platz when I developed it. And then these are my first ideas. It was actually then designed like that. And then this is the final proposal, which we then also built. And I often also try different kinds of representation modes for myself. This one is in ink, just to keep also practicing, because landscape architecture has a lot to do also with practice and exercising. It's like playing the piano. You have to constantly be at it. Otherwise, you lose touch. So it's important to constantly do it. This is a project for competition in Hellerau in Dresden, which about 120 years ago developed really interesting dance. Oskar Schlemmer from the Bauhaus in the Dada period. And it was also the first time there were the women, there was mostly women who did these dances where they also expressed their freedom and their equality, and gender discussion started. So it's a very important place in Germany, and an architect and I were asked to revitalize this site because it was derelict after unification. And these are some of the design drawings and the proposal for this wonderful theater near Dresden and the whole complex, and how we could put dance back into this site. So also an important project. again, to communicate ideas. Or process drawings, this is another competition I did many years ago, where we also designed the building. It's for a forest information center near Tokyo. And the architecture and the landscape meld together. So the structure of the architecture was not as important as the landscape, the contouring of the landscape. So I worked with the architect together, and I was more the lead. And currently I'm doing a studio called Gardens Are Buildings, and I still feel that it's actually the landscape architects who should be, particularly the beginning of a project, be the lead, because they know more about the way the land is graded. These are also design process drawings from 2005, just before I was appointed professor at UBC for competition near Berlin for a little town where they did a lot of clothing industry, and that mills, and these died down, and what do you do with these areas? And this was a park walk and a view over the city to these former mills. And then these are also conceptual drawings for competitions, big historic building complexes. But I just thought it's important for you to see what I have been doing over the years. And you can see my drawings are very simple. These are diagrams. They're just trying to explain layout and positioning. So I did not spend so much time on refining those, because it was more for the overall context for the drawings, and to explain to the client, often the architect who I work with, what our intentions were for the project. And you can see the development from a line drawing and then using color to refine it and to explain those things. Memory sketching. That's something I do to keep my brain thinking. And when I do my abroad tours, I do a lot of that with the students. So I go to a site, like this is in Palm Springs, and I go there because I like the desert very much. And then in the evening, I draw what I saw. And what that does is it helps you to define the things which are important for you. So these are some memory sketching, which I thought, what it does is it refines the observation's most important purpose, and I train my own eye with that. And these are some drawings I did on my iPad last year when I visited Joshua Tree in California, and what resonated with me and what was important for me. Or this one here, it's one of my favorites. Last year I went to the BC interior, and when I came back to Vancouver, what did BC mean to me? And it was these amazing lakes and the vastness and the scale of the mountains and the scale of the dark green trees. So I tried to express that in these drawings. Or just the foldings in Indian Wells of the mountains, or the experience on the ferry in the Gulf Islands. And these are all drawn by iPad, but with Procreate. So these are important for me just to keep tuned in. So practice. And I do this with the students as well. I go to sites in Persia, for example, and then we sketched it at night. And it helps you to memorize, and it refines your thinking. Now, just before I have about 15 or so slides left, I really want to talk a little bit about the professional use and animation of these. So LID is my field, and I'm not going to talk about it in detail, but how we can use drawing to inform this. So in the past, I showed my research with images like that of the disasters. And then I showed these images, and that scared the people. It scared the mayors. They don't want to see that. That's not good for the vote. So what can I do to convince? Then I showed them beautiful green roofs. That's what we can do. But often they don't understand how these systems function. So I then did representational sections to explain at different scales what happens in LID. They still didn't understand that. And then I thought, how can I develop this better? So I made a short definition what LID is. And that's really the key, and then I drew it. And then I realized, and that's when I taught it in my green roof classes, the students said, now we are getting it. I tried this. When I showed them still drawings, they didn't get what was going on. But when I showed them this, they understood, this is how this system works. I also left all my mistakes. You will see I just moved the people because I didn't like them. I left all that in there. And now they see the whole process of LID growing in front of them, how it functions holistically with the stormwater, the solar cell, and the rain, how the rain goes on the roof, is managed, then goes in the swale, and then is going into the swale on the road. And that, after I did these drawings, I realized that that is a way to actually really explain to the general public or the people who make the decisions, the voters, how important it is to manage to manage the rainwater. So these are really important tools which we need to use. And animation, I think, is one way to actually do that. And then by annotating it, it helps them to understand in detail what the issues are about. And then obviously, I thought myself, so how can I use this in design? So that was the big question. How can I actually use this? And I looked up and researched, and there's some people in Finland who argue like me. First, you need to design, you look at the top diagram, the water issues, and then you design the housing. That's a wonderful drawing, it's great. But for a mayor of a city to understand this, this is very complex. So I made these drawings where I tried to explain the situation, what normally happens, 3 animated movies, and how LID could help and how landscape architects should be designing. And I just use a very simple basic block and how normally design happens. The architect comes in, designs the buildings, and then we get a call and it says, oh, Daniel, you're good at stormwater management. Can you calculate, these are the spaces we have left. This is what we have decided. The client has agreed. Please shrub it up. And there are the areas where we would like you to do water retention. And I'll build a couple of green roofs to make it look green. And that's it. So this is what normally still sadly happens mostly in landscape architecture today. And I thought this is not good. So, and this is not enough. And so these tools can help to convince a mayor, a city, a stakeholder to think differently. So instead, I showed alternatives where I say, no, we need to design differently. So the architect and the landscape architect need to work together. They need to design this together. So, and the way to explain this again is by animation. So this is, first we need to think how much the site can actually manage how much water. And then we adjust the building and the green roof and the size of the buildings, the impervious surface to the site, and adjust it. And then actually we can really design properly with LID inclusive, not dictated by the urban planner and the architect. Here it is, fix it. That doesn't work anymore because of the problems we have in the world with the climate change and intensification of stormwater. So I use hand drawing animation on the iPad to convince the stakeholders how to introduce LID. And then this is the final one. Yeah, there you go. And so this is the final version, how I would like it to be done. First, we design the water and the water retention, the swales, and then we design architecture and not the other way around. But if you can say this orally, but if you visualize it on a big PowerPoint in the city hall and show it with animated hand drawings, you can do them on Rhino, it doesn't make a difference, but it takes just more time and it's more expensive. But you can do this at home yourself and really convince how we should be designing spaces and how we should be designing. That the landscape architect is actually the first on site, at least together with the architect. So I use these drawings as a convincing tool to convince and drive home LID as a tool. So we're working together with the landscape architects. That's the whole idea. And then I show them after that, because if I show them the actual tool, it's very complicated. I spent 5 years on it, it's 20 years of research, how to actually manage stormwater. We're still working on it, but we're nearly there. But if I show them that would not be useful for them. That's more for the engineers to look at, or that won't help. But the animation does, or if I want to, I can show them show them that image quickly and how that tool works, what it does. So I can visualize the complex processes of this civil engineering tool in a simple, hand-drawn, digestible manner to somebody who is not involved in this field, but who needs to make a decision about it. And often they may or may not be an LID specialist. So with these simple tools, you can even watch it at home. I can put it on YouTube or on my blog, and then they can watch this and make their decisions on the city and so on. So I think it's really important to see hand drawing today as an important part in how we animate the site, etc. So I think that is an important issue we should not forget. And that helps, and it helps also to explain the whole process, how this tool works, what it calculates, the evapotranspiration rate, the swale size, the retention size of the green roofs, etc. So that's what you can actually do with these animations. Now, the final tool I'm going to show you is how do you change opinions, behavioral change of society. I was just very interested in. With one of our former students, she actually got the Olmsted Scholarship this year. I'm very honored. From Africa, I developed this tool because it's been bothering me for 25 years. Overpopulation and why. And so we did this, I did this informative little movie about Africa and what the landscape architect's role could be at that scale. And what I see the big issues and what we can do as landscape architects to inform society, to help for behavioral change, not political, but to explain certain issues. And this tool is trying to convey also, give a message about what can be done. And so it's a tool to explain, and you will see it in a minute. And intentionally a bit slower gives time to actually create a bit of suspense. I think it's important. And then the smartphone can be used. And I use the smartphone in Africa because not many people have internet, only via smartphone. They don't have cable. The country is too big, they don't have that, but everybody has a smartphone. So landscape architects could use animated movies. In this case, it's for desertification processes to avoid desertification in agriculture, to protect land, to grow their own vegetables, to help them, to educate them on how to grow their own food, etc. So these are ways to protect them. And this is just an informative movie about this. So hand drawing can be used, animated as a behavioral change tool, in this case of overpopulation, and how desertification could be protected. So I think this is important in that sense, and a strong message for the students to see how important landscape architecture hand drawings still are and should be practiced. This is a long time ago, the screenshot, but it just shows a variety of drawings. I post most days when I have time, and I post unedited. I intentionally show what's happening to also take away the fear of the student. It's not about just the quality of the drawing, it's the content, what the drawing conveys. And it hopefully helps the students, excuse me, to be not so afraid when they design and draw. And I think the most important is we as educators must not lose that skill. And sadly, there's not many who can do it anymore. And so this young generation on Instagram, I talk about it in my book, two groups of young landscape architects who are teaching drawing again at an amazing level. One is an architect and one is a couple landscape architects. And they have amazing tutorials. So we can use actually Instagram to communicate those ideas. This is a while ago, but I just thought if any of you is interested, you're more than welcome. Daniel Drawings. I post also every day some images. I do like to do a bit of photography. And then finally, this is the new book, which is coming out soon, and you are more than welcome to look at the seminar publication on Seeing Environment 2018. The current one will be up next year sometimes to be viewed, but this information will be up as well. And most important, this is myself being an LA nerd, you should not lose your sense of humor about this whole thing. So take it serious, as I've shown you. It's a very serious tool, but also have joy with it. And then if you are not afraid about using pen on paper or on the iPad, then, and with a humor, I think that is a really good way forward to help. And that's my last slide. So there's all my information. Thank you very much.